certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Ciara Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
In 1990, while on the job for Telstra, Bradley Edwards attacked a social worker at Hollywood Hospital. We heard her testimony during the trial. In today's episode, Wendy Davis will tell you her story in her own words, the day she fought off the Claremont Killer. Hello and welcome to Claremont in Conversation, The Verdict. Natalie Bonjolo and Tim Clarke with you. And welcome to an incredibly brave woman. Wendy, thank you for being on the podcast.
You're welcome, Natalie. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Wendy.
Tim, who you've had many conversations with over, the past several months. Wendy, before we sort of take you back to recount that day, can you just tell us how you felt when those guilty verdicts were handed down?
To be quite honest, I was not surprised. I was really very relieved, particularly for the families of Ciara Glennon and Jane Rimmer, but I felt very sad for Sarah Spears' family that he couldn't find him guilty of that murder as well. But I do understand the reasoning. But yeah, overall I was happy. I was happy that had happened and very relieved that process had come to an end.
Did you get to know any of the other people involved during the process of the trial?
No, my contact was with the WA police and with the ODPP throughout the 4 years. And I have to say that that contact has been very, very supportive and very validating of my experience ever since the first phone call from the WA police at the end of 2016.
Yeah, and we'll come to that because that must have been an absolutely shocking day for you. Can we just take you back to 1990? Can you tell us a little bit about your life at the time when you were working at Hollywood Hospital?
I had been in that position in the palliative care unit for about 18 months. It was my second job at the hospital, and I was really just establishing my career. I loved my work. I'd done a lot of extra study that the hospital had paid for, and in professional studies in palliative care and in relation counselling. And I was a very busy mum. I had 3 teenage daughters, and my life was very full and very busy. And I saw myself staying at the hospital and working in that job for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. So in May 1990, it's the early afternoon. Can you talk us through what happened that day while you were just quietly going about your job?
I was writing a report that I wanted to get finished really quickly. It was my youngest daughter's 11th birthday, and I was concentrating on the report. And the little office that we worked in was like an annex on the back of the palliative care ward, and it joined the palliative care ward and a little ante-room with a toilet off the back, and it was backed on by the PABX system. There was a lot of upgrading going on in that hospital at the time, so there were technicians and workmen around the place. So I'd noticed a few people but hadn't really taken much notice. My job was quite busy. Anyway, I was writing this report and I was alone in the office, and I heard a noise. My desk, I worked on my desk backed onto the ante-room. I shared the office with an occupational therapist and a physiotherapist, but they were often not in the office. They worked on other wards. And I so my back was to the door, and I heard a bit of a noise, and a voice said, "Oh, is it okay to use the toilet?" And I twisted round on my chair slightly. I was still immersed in my work, and I said, I sort of grunted. I saw that it was a Telstra technician. I saw that he must have had a uniform on. I don't know how I knew, but I knew that he was. He seemed like he was okay, and I just grunted and nodded, and I pushed myself back to my desk and got on with my work. And I was aware of him going behind me, and I was aware of the toilet flushing, and I was aware that he came back behind me and back out to the ward door. And then he said, he said, "I've dropped my pencil." He said, "Can I go back and get it?" And I didn't even turn around this time, and I thought that's a bit of a weird thing to ask. And then it suddenly occurred to me that when the toilet flushed, he hadn't been in there long enough to use the toilet. And as I was thinking those things, a hand came around my face. It had a cloth in it, clasped it over my face, and an arm came round my neck, my shoulders and my neck, and hoiked me back off my chair and lifted me back towards the toilet. And I thought I thought there was something on the cloth. I was absolutely convinced that I was going to die. I was convinced I was going to die. And I was terrified. After a few seconds, I realised that I had to breathe in. I breathed in. I could hardly move. I was still being pulled back towards the toilet. And I breathed in, and I realised that there was nothing on the cloth. I couldn't smell anything. I thought, I've got a chance here, and I started to really struggle. And I was trying to get a foothold on the carpet. I was lifted right off the chair, and I somehow twisted around, and the chair fell over. I could feel my shoe came off, and I was struggling, and I was pressed up facing him, and I was still being pulled back. We'd got to the toilet door by this stage, and I was fighting as much as I could. The only thing I could really move was my legs, and I remember kicking out with my legs and making contact with him, and the cloth had fallen away, and because I was rubbed up against his chest, and the next minute everything just stopped. Everything just stopped, and his arms came down, and I fell back, and I just looked at him, and he had this strange look in his eye, and then it's like he shook his head, and he just started saying, I'm sorry," and he was moving like between back and forward, and I was backing away at the same time, and he just kept saying over and over again, I'm sorry," and I started to run, one shoe on, one shoe off, my cardigan hanging off, and I ran out and up the ward towards the nurses' station.
That's 30 years ago, Wendy, and your recall is extraordinary of those tiny details, which speaks to me of obviously how shocking it is. Some people bury those experiences, obviously, but you've obviously got almost total recall. Does that speak to the obvious impact it had on you at the time and still does?
I buried it for 25 years. I buried it not long after, and when the police first rang me just before Bradley was arrested and asked me what happened, it came absolutely flooding back to me in great detail, and it's been quite traumatic, actually. Not quite traumatic. It's been very traumatic, yeah.
Yeah. And Wendy, I'm just curious, in that time, it was such an unexpected attack, and you were taken off guard. And what was it about you that you obviously fought so hard and so quickly? Was it just an instinct to, I've just got to do something?
Oh, look, as soon as I realised there was nothing on the cloth, the survival instinct completely kicked in, and it wasn't a conscious thing. I just fought as hard as I possibly could. It wasn't anything that I was thinking about. It was just an instinct, and I just it sort of, as soon as I knew, I went from thinking I was going to die, and I really, really was convinced that was the end of my life for a fleeting few seconds. And then it went from that straight into when I knew there was nothing on that cloth, I knew I had to fight, and I did fight. Yeah.
And was it clear to you, you thought that you were going to die, was it also clear to you what his intentions were? Did you have a sense of what was going to happen?
Oh, I just knew that something bad was happening. I didn't even have time to think about anything at all about what it was at the time, but I knew it was something bad. You know, when someone wants to hurt you, you actually know when someone really wants to hurt you.
Yeah.
And this was in a place that was a place of care, Wendy, as well. So it should be one of the most safest places in society, in the middle of a hospital, in the middle of the day, just doing your work. I mean, the collision of those two worlds must have been hard to get your head around as well.
Yeah, it was. I was in shock, and I can remember the attack very clearly, but the things that happened immediately after, I have. I was in total shock, and I have only flashes of memory about what happened in the ensuing hours after the attack.
Can you talk us through what you do recall of that time? I mean, we did hear from some people during the trial, like Rick Marshall, who was the security guard who I think came to your assistance. Can you talk to us about those moments just after those next couple of hours?
I have no memory of Rick Marshall coming. I have no memory of that. I have a very, very vague memory of a police officer, or police officers attending, but I do not remember speaking to them at all. I have a memory of the nurses in the nurses' station making me cups of tea and putting brandy. I remember them. They said it's for the shock. I remember them. Yeah, nurses are good at that.
Yes.
I remember that. And I have a very vague memory. They called my husband to come and pick me up because I couldn't drive home, and I have a vague memory of him arriving. I don't remember going home, and I certainly don't remember the evening. I have no idea if we celebrated my daughter's birthday or not.
Oh, gosh. And were you offered counselling at the time or anything like that?
No. I was off work for a couple of days, and I went to I saw a doctor because I thought I might have whiplash. I had a very sore neck, and I saw a local doctor, and he noted that I had bruising and contusions on my neck, and because I thought I might have to have some record of that for workers' compensation or something. But I was still in a lot of shock. So again, the memories are not really clear of that time.
I mean, Wendy, just listening to this now, I mean, it actually beggars belief at how this happened and what happened following the attack on you. Do you recall your conversations with police and trying to convey to them how serious this assault was?
No, the only time that I remember, I'd say I had that vague memory of the police arriving, and I kept expecting the police to come and speak to me in more detail, but nobody did. And there's actually no, as far as I'm aware, there is no signed statement from me from that time. The first time that I ever talked in any depth to anybody about the attack was when the WA police rang me just before Bradley Edwards was arrested for the Claremont serial killings.
Gosh. So after the attack, though, you did receive a visit from some people from Telstra.
I didn't receive a visit. I went to a meeting. There was a meeting, and it was in the days that followed. I can't remember exactly. I remember my husband came with me, and I think it was in a local police. I think it was in Swanbourne Police Station. It was somewhere along Stirling Highway. It could have even been a Telstra office, but it was a meeting in which there was somebody who I understood to be a representative from Telstra who apologised for the attack and said that Bradley Edwards was a good employee, that he was very sorry for what he'd done, that he was undergoing some relationship problems, and that he'd just snapped, and that he'd never done anything like that before, and I was just.
What did you make of this? This is unbelievable.
Well, I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I tried to explain that I was traumatised and hurt, and that I didn't think that it was a normal behaviour. I didn't think it was normal behaviour for somebody to attack a complete stranger just because they're having relationship problems. And I can remember feeling unheard. I can remember feeling that he thought I was just making a bit of a fuss, and I felt quite humiliated. I guess I felt humiliated.
Yeah.
And that was compounded, Wendy, when a few days later you found out what Mr. Edwards is actually being charged with by the police, which was, and even the wording smacks of not taking this seriously, because he was eventually charged with a common assault.
Yeah, when I found out that he was charged with common assault, I was just blown away, because, my husband and I both thought that he would be charged with at least aggravated assault or possibly attempted deprivation of liberty. And when I heard that, I just lost it. I became very upset. I can remember actually at the time that I heard it, that was the first time I think I'd been still in shock up to hearing that. And when I heard that, I just became virtually, hysterical. And, and I said, look, nobody seems to said to my husband, nobody seems to understand. I could have been raped, I could have been killed. That's when I think the reality of what had happened really overtook me. But I also felt completely powerless, and I think a feeling of powerlessness crept in, and I went back to work, and I there was a lot of talk at work about installing alarms and, making sure that people were safe. But the job that I loved the place had become somewhere that I didn't feel safe in. And 2 weeks after I got back, I handed my notice in.
Which is a tragedy on its own, because you've already said how much you loved that job, how much you felt the hospital and the health system had invested in you personally with your extra training. And did you feel guilty in a sense for that?
Yeah, I felt quite guilty that the hospital had done that. And I actually applied for a job that I had only a month or so, a few weeks before, declined an invitation to apply for because I was so happy in my work. Luckily, they hadn't recruited anybody, and I moved out of the hospital. Yeah, I moved out, and I got on with my life. I buried everything.
Oh gosh,
probably was a self-preservation technique in itself, was it, Wendy? Because you just wanted to, you didn't want any more impact of what had happened to, or try to avoid any more impact than it actually had.
Yes, yeah, I reckon that would be fair to say that. Yes, yep.
And Wendy, for us listening now, I mean, the sense of outrage and injustice that you were forced to leave the job that you loved, and meanwhile, Edwards gets to keep his. I mean, we discussed this in the podcast because it's just gobsmacking.
I was furious. I think when I learned of his arrest, one of the biggest emotions that came up for me, all the trauma returned, but one of the biggest emotions that came up for me was anger. And I think that's part of the reason that I've spoken out and wanted to speak out, because at the time I was really, really angry. I never understood why he only received such a minor charge.
Yep.
The police said that they didn't have enough evidence, and I couldn't understand that at the time. And then there have been things that have come up in the trial that have made me even more angry, if you like, because to learn that the security guard, to learn that, I mean, he said that Bradley Edwards admitted to trying to drag me into the toilet.
That's right.
And I didn't know that, and I didn't know that. I also didn't know that obviously that Bradley Edwards had been referred for a sexual offenders program.
Yeah.
So all of those things have raised even more questions in my mind than I had after the attack happened, and that's basically, I guess, the reason that I've spoken out.
Wendy, do you have any anger towards Telstra that one of their employees on the job could do this to you, yet, we hear in the trial that they can't even find any evidence of it on his work record? Do you have any anger towards the company?
Oh, I feel very angry, and I'm astonished. I'm absolutely astonished. I think gobsmacked would be probably the best word that I could use to describe how I feel. I can't believe it. It caused so much trauma to me and caused me to leave my job, and caused me a lot of anxiety. And then the resurgence of the trauma has been even more difficult in some ways than when it happened at the time, because it's in the context of brutal rape and serial killing.
And it was a very brief and very small moment in the trial, but when the Telstra staff member who was called to give evidence, Tony Vermeero was his name, And he went through everything that he could find. So there were records from Mr. Edwards' work history, so we knew exactly when he got his promotions. There were records of his pay slips, there were records of his leave, there was records of his annual leave, there were records of which car he drove, at what time, and what access to those cars he had. There was records of the days off that he had, his sick leave. But when he was asked right at the end of his evidence, is there any record of this incident in 1990, there was nothing. Not one letter, not one record of certainly of this meeting that Wendy remembers, but anything else in terms of a disciplinary process or anything. So it is a blank page, or several blank pages, in Telstra's work history, which begs questions as to where those if those records ever existed, and if they did, where they were. Now, we've attempted to talk to Telstra or ask them for comment, any comment, in the last, since Thursday, and they've stoutly and staunchly said that they won't be making any comment, which personally I think is an indictment on them. They might not like me saying that, but I'm not that bothered, because there are still questions to be answered as to what happened there. And there were other things that were sort of lacking. We learned later that the WA police, when this Telstra link was first made in 96, 98, there were also sort of faxes sent about who had certain cars at certain times, and Mr. Edwards' name did not appear on those formal requests either. Now, they said that was in error, but I mean, I'm sure errors do happen, but there's just a trail of breadcrumbs that should have been there that weren't. And for whatever reason, they still weren't. And I think personally that Telstra should be brave enough to say, well, we either we don't know what happened, or those records have disappeared. We should have done more at the time. But as it stands today, they haven't made any comment at all.
Very, very disappointing.
Isn't it? Wendy, I mean, at the very least, do you feel that you would deserve an apology?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, I do. I mean, surely there must have been probation reports sent to his employer, I would have thought.
Absolutely.
There must have been something, yes.
And I think this is something that, people are very upset about. You know that we do get a lot of emails to the podcast, and this is coming up repeatedly. People want to know what happened there at Telstra, that the protocols weren't followed as they should have been.
Yes, and I would like to know that as well.
Yeah. Well, Tim was telling us yesterday about the moment that you did get that phone call from police, and this in itself is, extraordinary as well, because as you mentioned, you had absolutely buried this experience. Can you talk us through that day?
I guess there were two phone calls. There was a phone call a couple of days before he was arrested, and from a detective who just completely out of the blue, who said that they were investigating some old cases, and did I remember the attack that happened to me in 1990, and when I was working at Hollywood Hospital, and I said, yes, I do. I mean, you've got to remember, I hadn't thought of this for 25 years, but the words came tumbling out. And as I spoke to her, what happened was quite clear in my mind, and she was taking notes. She took notes, and she said, "Look," she said, I'll probably be back in touch, and basically, please don't speak to anybody else about this." And then the conversation finished, and I got off the phone, and I I said to my husband, I said, I've just had this, strange phone call from the WA police, and it's about they're investigating some old crimes, and they wanted to talk to me about what happened to me at Hollywood Hospital all those years ago. So we were talking about what happened, and as I was talking about it, things were coming back to me, but we really didn't know. I thought maybe, maybe that the person that had attacked me had attacked somebody else or something, and they'd linked him to it, later. Anyway, a couple of days after that, I received another phone call and said that, I just needed to prepare you and just to let you know that the person that attacked you at Hollywood Hospital has just been arrested for the Claremont serial killings. And there's going to be a news broadcast. And I just went into shock again. I just went into shock again. And I was actually just coming out of my Pilates class when I got that call. And I drove home, and I didn't even remember the drive home. It was a bit like the drive home after the attack. And I got home and we put the television on, and Carlo Callahan was there talking about what had happened. And that was a couple of days before Christmas, and it was just it was surreal. It was surreal. I couldn't get my head around it, and there was so much trauma and so many flashbacks, and all sorts of things happened. It was a very, very difficult few weeks, actually.
And you lived in Perth, obviously, Wendy, during the 90s. You had teenage daughters.
Well, I was in Perth until late 96, and but I was going through a lot of trauma myself. In 96, my marriage broke up, and but I do remember, my girls were all out and about, and I do remember being quite concerned about them when they went out, because of the news that there was a killer around. But by the end of 96, I'd actually moved up to Kalgoorlie, and then, didn't really live back in Perth again for a number of years. So I was quite removed from what was actually going on in Perth at that time. Yeah, quite removed.
And I guess in the far recesses of your mind, you were a bit removed from the Claremont situation, but when you would hear about the girls missing from Claremont and what have you, did it trigger anything in your mind that you would think it would make you think of the time where you were assaulted?
Never.
No.
Never. It was I had completely buried it.
Wow.
Totally, to be able to get on with things. And as I said, by the time at the end of 96, we moved, and I was living up in Kalgoorlie for the next 3 years, and then moved over to Tasmania. So I came back to WA a few years after that, and I was back there for a couple of years, but then we moved to Tasmania permanently about 15 years ago. Yep.
And so when those two worlds collided just a few days before Christmas, Wendy, you've just alluded to it then, that must have been, I suppose, forced you to relive what had happened back in 1990, but then there was the extra shock, or the additional shock, of knowing that this man that had attacked you may have gone on to do much worse to a lot more people.
Yes, yeah. The resurgence of the trauma has been really quite difficult to deal with, because as I said before, it's in the context of, murder and
Yeah.
brutal rape, and so the mind takes over a little bit. So it has been difficult to deal with, but the WA police put me in touch with the Victims of Crime counsellor in Hobart, and that was I saw her a few times, and that was very helpful at the beginning of the process, and I've got a lot of support from family and friends, and so the trial process for me has been tiring, exhausting, but obviously I have to keep things in perspective,
Yes.
and nothing as exhausting as it would have been, for the families of those murdered girls. And, the way that they've managed has been an inspiration to me, I have to say, yes.
Yeah. And when you, during the course of the trial, were you able to follow closely the details of Edward's crimes, or was it too close to home? Were there certain things that you just didn't want to know about because of the closeness?
I didn't want to know about the actual manner of the girls' deaths and the burial sites. The details about those things I avoided following media reports. And the good news for me living in Tasmania was I was able to pick and choose the parts that I did follow. Yes, yeah.
After the police had obviously told you what was going on, Wendy, you then had to, I suppose, broach the subject with the ones closest to you, and that was obviously all happening around Christmas. I mean, how did you actually go about explaining to them this hugely shocking moment?
I carried it with me until Christmas Day, and then I couldn't keep it inside me any longer, and I just blurted it out, really. And my family were astounded, but my daughters, they were shocked as well, because they had obviously nothing like mine, but they had a memory. They had memories of when the attack happened to me and how distressed I was and how angry I was. They had memories of that, but they were all shocked. I spoke to family and my brother, and because I had buried what happened in order to get on with my life, a lot of my friends and my family, this was the first that they'd actually heard of it. And they were just completely shocked. I'm actually a person that doesn't make a big fuss about things. I keep things pretty quiet, and so I think that's partly, after it all happened, after everything happened, I think partly why I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell any family. I didn't tell only people that knew really what happened were the colleagues at work, my husband, my close family, and the colleagues that worked at the hospital. Yeah. And I didn't talk to anybody else about it at all. It was, I didn't like to make too much of a fuss.
Gosh. And Wendy, how are your family all feeling about things now? I mean, are they angry for you?
I think they would like to. I think they would like me to be able to let it go now.
Right.
That's what I think. Yeah, I think they'd like me. Of course, they're angry. They can see the impact that it had on me. They understand the impact that it had on me at the time. I think they're, but I think they, they would just be happy for me if I'm able to let it go. And I think telling my story has actually helped to do that.
Yeah. And you showed incredible courage coming to the trial and having to face Edwards in court after all those years. What was that like for you?
It was. I was very apprehensive. It was. I've never had to be in that situation before, and I hope I'll never have to be in that situation again. It was. It was scary. It was. I was well supported, I have to say again, by the WA police and by by the DPP. I was very well supported, but it was a big thing to do, to be on public display, and it was excruciating to see Dennis Glennon, to see the family members. It was very hard to actually go into court and to face him and to tell my story. It was very hard, to do it so publicly.
Yeah, and what people might not realise is that it's not just a flight over and tell your story. There's so much build-up and preparation, so it wasn't just one trip to Perth, was it, Wendy? You had to come over and meet Carmel. There's a proofing process, so they go through it. So, people who maybe see witnesses just rock up at the dock and tell their story and go, they think, oh, well, they've done their bit. But there's so much preparation and anxiety and disquiet that has to be. You're not just telling your story once, are you, Wendy? You have to tell it over and over and over again to get ready to tell it in public.
That's right. It has been an exhausting nearly 4 years, and as I said before, in some ways I'm lucky that I've been in Tasmania, but in other ways my life has been continually interrupted with contact. From the police. In terms, I had, 2 detectives came over and took an in-depth statement, spent 2 days here in Tasmania, and, in preparation for the trial. And then, as you said, there were meetings when I went to Perth. I've got family in Perth, and, every time I visited, I tried to coordinate meetings with the ODPP as well. And so it's not been a simple process. It's been a long process, and it's been a stressful process. So I'm glad that it's just about at an end. Yes.
And Wendy, you should feel so proud of the part that you played in this process, because Tim would come in to us and say, you were so impressive and so composed as a witness, and, what you've done is incredible in helping bring justice to these families as well.
Thank you, Nat. That's actually really good to hear that. Really good to hear that.
Just a little bit of behind-the-scenes info. With the suppressed witnesses at court, the police were and Wendy at the time was a suppressed witness, so her name was suppressed during the trial to protect her identity and protect the whole process. So the police, to facilitate the camera people and photographers outside court, they started giving us headless photos. So what they do is they take a photo of what the suppressed witness was wearing on the day from their neck down. And they would show us this photo to note, so we as the media would know what that person was wearing, so we wouldn't inadvertently or overtly take a picture of them and then publish it by mistake. And so I think I'm right in saying, Wendy, that you were very, very smartly dressed on the day. I remember looking at the outfit and thinking, I'm not going to forget that outfit ever, I don't think. But it's just one of those little weird things that has to happen to and we've talked about it loads of times on the podcast, the million moving parts that go on. And kudos to the WA police for thinking of doing that. I've never seen that done before.
Yes.
And that's the level. And, you know, Wendy's talked about the police finally helping her through this process, when back in 1990 they maybe should have helped a little bit more. And so, as I say, and that was done for a few suppressed witnesses, but it's just one of those little things that you would never think would happen in your life, that a photo of you headless would be handed out to numerous media outside court, so they wouldn't take a photo of you. It's a strange thing, but it's one of the many strange things that's happened in the last year or so.
That's right. I remember when it was Katie the detective, and I remember when she took the photo, and it was quite weird. She said, "Can I take a photo of you without your head?" And just before I was due to appear in the court, and she showed me the photo, yes, so that you've seen, and I didn't know. I was getting all geared up to go to court, and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I saw it. Yes.
And well, I've mentioned it, Wendy. You've chosen to speak out now, and you've done a few interviews over the last few days, but you wanted to let the public know that this is not about money or notoriety or publicity for you. This is about you finally getting to tell your story in your own words, framed in your experience, rather than someone talking for you, as they did all those years ago.
That's absolutely right. I want to make it perfectly clear that I didn't get paid for the interview that I did for 60 minutes, and my speaking out has never been about anything else than actually being able to tell what happened to me in 1990, because nobody listened to me then, but they're actually listening now.
They are now.
Wendy, we're in awe of your courage and your bravery, and on behalf of everybody listening to the podcast, we thank you so much for sharing your story. It's an incredibly brave thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat.
Bit of peace now, Wendy. Bit of peace and quiet.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks. Yes.
We'll be back tomorrow when Tim will chat to the DNA expert based in England, Dr. Jonathan Whittaker. Join us then for Claremont in Conversation, The Verdict.
This podcast is hosted by Natalie Bonjolo, produced by Kate Ryan, and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au. And if local news delivered differently appeals to you, tune into WA's newest morning show, The West Live with Jenna Clarke. It's talkback radio, but without the interruptions. Listen live weekdays from 8:45 a.m. on thewest.com.au or catch up with the podcast.